Welcome back everyone, Patrick here, moving on to another question dealing with exponents, so another word problem. So we're told that 500 grams of bacteria doubles every 3 hours. And given that scenario, in part A, we have to write an equation for the amount of bacteria in terms of hours. And then in part B, we have to figure out when was there 125 grams of bacteria. So with something like this, let's first create a table. So we'll have hours, and then we'll have a certain mass or amount of bacteria. Now at 0 hours, let's say right now, we have 500 grams of bacteria. And notice that it's doubling every 3 hours. So in 3 hours from now, this 500 will turn into 1,000. And then 6 hours, this 1,000 will turn into 2,000. And you just keep doubling every 3 hours, etc., etc. So that's going to be the pattern right there. And so from here with this table, what you want to do is try to create an equation. So let's introduce some variables here. So I'll let m equal the mass, and then for hours, we could use t. You could also use h, you could also use x. It doesn't matter what letters you use here. I'm just using letters that make sense with this particular question. So hopefully by this point, we've done a couple of examples dealing with exponential word problems. So from here, hopefully you could tell that the mass is going to equal the initial mass, which in this case is 500. And then we're told that it's doubling every 3 hours. So we know that the base of the exponential function is going to be 2. Right? Because if it's doubling every 3 hours, what we're going to be doing is multiplying by 2 every time. If it was tripling, then this base would be 3. Or if bacteria is decaying, meaning that the amount is getting smaller, in this case the bacteria is growing. But bacteria can also decay, and a lot of times you'll be given half-life questions. So for example, the bacteria has a half-life of something, then this base here would be a half. Right? So this base changes depending on the scenario that you're given. And now what we want to do is put something in the exponent here where it's going to make sense in terms of this table. So it's doubling every 3 hours. So that means that when we plug in 3 into this exponent, we have to get an exponent 1 over here. And the way we would do that is we would take the amount of hours and divide it by 3, which is that doubling time. And so notice that that would make sense, because if we plug in 3 for t, 3 divided by 3 is 1. And then we have to do the exponent first. 2 to the power 1 is 2 times 500 gives us 1,000. Or if we plug in 6, 6 divided by 3 would give us 2. 2 to the power 2 would give us 4 times 500 would give us 2,000. Or if we plug in 9, 9 divided by 3 is 3. 2 to the power 3 is 8. 8 times 500 would give us 4,000. So with these kinds of questions, if you're not fully comfortable dealing with exponential equations like this and creating exponential equations with word problems, I highly recommend making a table first with whatever information you're given, and then just look at the table and then work with making the equation. And then once you make the equation, what I recommend doing before proceeding further is checking if all of these numbers work. So plugging in 0 for t, plugging in 3, plugging in 6, plugging in 9, and making sure you get that respective mass that you intuitively got from the scenario of the question. And then once you have that, you can be pretty confident that your equation is correct. And then in part B, they're asking, when was there 125 grams of bacteria? So notice that at time 0, we could call time 0 like right now, right? The present moment. And so this is going to be 3 hours in the future, 6 hours in the future, 9 hours in the future. So if now is 0, and they're asking when was there 125, notice that 125 is less than 500. And so that was in the past. And so when we plug in 125 for m, what's going to happen is when we solve for this t value, that's what we're solving for, the t value, it's actually going to be a negative value. So for example, a t value of -3, if we sort of extend this table this way, would be 3 hours earlier, right? Because 0 is right now. +3 is 3 hours in the future. -3 would be 3 hours earlier. And so the t value that we're going to get, and it would make sense to get, because 125 is less than the amount we have now, and this bacteria isn't decaying, it's actually growing. So the t value that we're going to get is going to be negative. And so we just have to solve for this t value at this point. And the way that we do that is we can get rid of this 500 over here in front, so we could divide both sides by 500. So notice that that would cancel out. And then notice that 125 over 500, that actually simplifies to 1 over 4. You can divide the numerator and denominator by 125 to get this 1 over 4. And so you'd end up with 1 over 4 equaling this exponential expression like that. And then from here, notice that we can take this and put it in this kind of format, because the 1 over 4, we can rewrite that as 1 over 2 to the power of 2, right? 4 is the same as 2 to the power 2. And then we'll have 2 to the power of t over 3. So we're getting closer, but it's this left side, it's not quite in this format. But what we can do is we could bring this up, and we would end up with 2 to the power -2, right? Because this and this, they're the exact same thing. And then this is going to equal 2 to the power of t over 3. And now notice we have 2 to the power of something is equal to 2 to the power of something. So both of these exponents, because we have the same base, they have to equal. So basically -2 equals t over 3. And then let me actually write it as t over 3 like that. And then the -2 you could put over 1. Then we could just cross multiply to solve for that t value. 1 times t gives us t, and then -2 times 3 would give us -6. And so that ends up being the answer for part B, 6 hours earlier. We had a mass of 125 grams if right now we have a mass of 500. And then you can check this answer. So what we can do is we could plug in -6 into our equation. So what would happen? 500, 2, and then we'll have -6 over 3, and then we'll have -6 over 3 would give us -2. We have to work with the exponent first before multiplying over here. So we'll have 500, 2 to the power -2 is like 1 over 2 to the power +2, which would be 500, 1 over 4, like that. And then 500 times 1 over 4 would give us 125. Right, so whatever answers you get, you could check with the equation that you have before. And that's the answer. So 6 hours earlier, there was 125 grams of bacteria. Right, so hopefully you're fairly comfortable with these kinds of questions by now. We've done a couple in the course up to this point. But if you're not, what I recommend doing is, again, taking these scenarios, reading them carefully, taking your time, making a table of values, taking your time to make the equation, making sure that all the values that you have, maybe make a couple like this, 4 to 5, plugging them in, making sure everything works out, and then you can be confident that your equation is correct. And then you can answer any other questions that they give you, like in this case, part B, with the equation that you got.